That's pretty cool. In the Civil War, the United States Civil War, they had so many records that were so confusing and so complex that it would take the veterans months, sometimes years, just to get the basic things decided. And the records were in buildings, and they bound them by red tape, and that's where the term red tape comes from. So they say, oh, I'm caught up in red tape. It came from a system that kept records. And there were systems like that all throughout the U.S. military for about 100 years after that they were still trying to get this record situation, and we kept having more wars and more issues and more veterans and trying to get this record situation under control. Nobody had any way of proving that they were a veteran or whatever, so the United States government spent a huge fortune and said, okay, we're going to fix this. We're going to get everything all into one place, get it organized, get it in a nice system. We'll get all these records from all these different diverse places, from different wars and different veterans and different services. We're going to put them in one place, and we're going to organize them. We're going to have them in order, and every record from every single veteran in the whole world will be in this one source place called the National Records Center, which then burned down. And 16 million records in 1973 from every single person who served in the U.S. Army from 1916 to 1960 was gone. So if you were in World War II in the Army, there is absolutely no record that is a true statement or not. The people who landed on D-Day and defeated the Nazis have, if they're in the Army, no record that they ever did so, because 16 million records, which were all in one central source, were completely destroyed. So things change and evolve, and now we have the ability to put these things on our phone. Pretty cool. That's the kind of thing that is an illustration of how this technology is going to change the world, and I'm really glad we got to hear from Paul, because we've talked a lot about the currency, but this technology goes way beyond that. It goes to the invention itself. And I can imagine a world where we're wrong about Bitcoin, the currency. I think it's increasingly less likely. But I cannot imagine a world where we're wrong about this technology. It's too superior of an idea. It's an idea whose time has come, and there's nothing that can stop an idea of this level. Somebody who has the laptop, Bitcoin is an idea too big to fail. Oh, that's yours. Nice. I like that. So our last panel of the day, David, Makki, Ola, Austin, if you want to come on up. Tomorrow, this has been a really great crowd, and thank you all for your support. Come in early tomorrow, or on time. Because you may have fun tonight and get into great conversations and be up late. But we have Garrett from Circle, who's going to be talking. We have Jean Marie from BitReserve. We have Housley Miner, who I mentioned earlier, who is with BitReserve and was founder of CNET, which is a huge, successful innovational company. We have Noah Radford, who's going to speak with him. Also, David is going to join their panel as well. Now, Noah is the strategic advisor and the chief technology advisor to the ruler of Dubai. So that's kind of a neat thing. You're not still here, Noah. I think he stepped out. He'll be here tomorrow. And then we have Charlene Chen from BitPesa, and Charlene and I were talking earlier. BitPesa is one of the most famous companies in the Bitcoin space who does the least number of conferences because, number one, they're busy working on their business, which is something every company should do. But even more importantly than that, conferences are a very good thing for business. But more importantly than that is the logistics. Being in Kenya, there are very few conferences that they can get to without burning the better part of a work week to get there. So we have a unique, or at least unusual, opportunity to hear from the company that everybody wants to hear about, which is BitPesa. Everybody's excited about it. Ira from Coinapult is going to talk, and then we have a panel with some exchanges, and then we have the networking session, advice session kind of thing. If you have a plan or something, I'll be available. The other speakers, for the most part, will be available, and then we'll head over for drinks. That's tomorrow. So tonight we have one more panel, and then we'll take a break for a couple hours, and we'll meet up at the Warwick. So go ahead, come on up on stage. You met David and Ola. Makki is a good friend of mine from Saudi Arabia, and he is, you can sit in the middle, Makki, and Austin's going to stand here. Makki is...
Mic. Can I just sit there? Because I've got this mic on. Let them sit.
Yeah, either way. Well, yeah, well, there's 3 seats. So Austin's going to be up here, so, yeah. And what else did I? Yeah. So Makki's with Bitcoiners of Arabia, which is like a meetup group, and we're going to talk a little bit about sort of Bitcoin and the future in this part of the world, which I think we're going to cover both startups and the overall environment, and how you can work in this region if you're an existing company. What might you think about if you're planning on coming here, joint ventures, that kind of thing. I think I covered everything. So Austin, and Austin, by the way, I thanked him last night. I don't know if I did again today, but this conference wouldn't happen without Austin. Austin has put a ton of work into this, and super helpful because he, like me, is passionate about building the community, loves Bitcoin, loves Dubai, and so we give him a double hand for hosting this, but also making this possible. So
thank you so much. Thank you, much appreciated. So I've been here in Dubai couple months now. I was only supposed to be here for 6 days, and I think it's been like 52 today. And the reason I'm still here is because it's a very exciting place. I don't think there's probably no place on earth today where the ground, the environment, the substrate is more fertile for Bitcoin to take off than Dubai and the Middle East, for a number of reasons that have been touched on here, and some maybe that we'll get into more. And as I've been here, I've met with I guess many of the major payment processors and a lot of banks and payments type people in the region, and I know for a fact that this conference, this moment, that things are really about to take off. And I've heard of a lot of people who formerly were, by formerly I mean maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, were busy entrenched in some of these legacy financial institutions, who have now, it seems like they've switched gears. And I think what are we going into? 2015? I think it's going to be a very exciting time for Bitcoin, specifically in Dubai. This is the capital of money moving, right? The reason we're not standing on sand right now is because of visionaries decades past saw that free markets opening up to economic development and allowing innovation and ideas to happen here, and allowing people to bring their resources here and put them and move them out, it was advantageous, right? So we're going to talk a little today about Bitcoin in the region, and maybe how some of you that are interested in being involved in like the startup environment, and how we can all move on from here, and how what the environment looks like on the ground here. And maybe we can get started by the panelists discussing how they were introduced to Bitcoin, because this region, until very recently, there wasn't really much penetration about knowledge about Bitcoin. So maybe you want to start with that.
Can you hear me? Oh,
yep.
Great. It was all coincidental, to be honest. So I come from a technical background. I've studied engineering, so I've always been interested as well in technology, worked in the tech sector for a number of years before moving back to the region. Moved back to the region and got more involved in the tech startup scene, which at that point, I got more involved in sort of like e-commerce and payments, and then understanding that landscape in the Middle East more. And then at the same time, I started reading more about Bitcoin. Came across it actually through it was like a negative article on Business Insider, and it was sort of like the first bubble where it was when bust. I think that was sort of like early 2013. Reading more, I was reading more about it before, but I was like wasn't really convinced. But at that point, you had like a lot of really negative media covering it up, and at that point, I was like, okay, if there's like all that sort of splash on Bitcoin, and they always say like even bad media is like sort of good. Media and good news for any events that are happening. So I think it was sort of like the bad media that actually attracted me to Bitcoin to begin with, and then I started reading more about it, and then I figured out that actually, no, that's it looks and it sounds legit. It's not as what people say it's a Ponzi scheme. And then you read more into technology, and then you connect with other people through Twitter and through other friends, and then I got introduced to as well, David, and then we started talking about Bitcoin in the region and stuff. So it all kind of like as well and dragged along, and I got into that sort of like I want to start a business as well in Bitcoin. But now, like sort of connecting the dots backward, it's great that we get to this point where we're like building startups and actually building products, and we're catering for the Middle East market. But when I first read about Bitcoin, and then seriously got into Bitcoin around a year and a half ago, I would have never expected to be sort of like running a business now, seriously. So it's kind of sort of like funny just connecting the dots background. But it's been great so far.
Fantastic. Makki?
Is my mic on?
I think it's good.
All right. Well, in Saudi, I've got to say it's similar to the situation the Middle East was last year. So there's not a lot of startups. There's beginning action. The interest group is picking up a little bit, and there's people trying to get involved and trying to get something done. I still think it's in its early stages. I don't think it's going to pick up as much as it has in the Western world, particularly to Saudi, because a lot in the way that the existing system works. The banks hike on the government, which is full of money, and the system in place is actually makes the people comfortable and makes everyone around there comfortable. There are situations or places where it can improve, I don't think revolutionize, but improve on existing systems when it comes to application. I referenced what Paul said about the end product is the same. It's just the ground underneath is now decentralized instead. And in that sense, the people kind of aren't that bothered. And in a society where you're governed by social culture and social norms rather than innovation and revolution, it's kind of a little rough patch that it's going to have to go through.
David?
So I'll give you a quick story. So I found out about Bitcoin when I was in Canada. I wasn't in the Middle East when that happened. It was like 2-3 years ago. Like a lot of people, the first time around, I didn't take it seriously. Spent 15 bucks, bought 3 Bitcoins back then, which was a lot, and then completely forgot about it. And then it's a year later when there was, I think it was the second price bubble that I took it very seriously and invested my time in it. I think one thing that I forgot to mention in my talk, which is sort of relevant on this point here, is I do think that Bitcoin in the Middle East today is where it was around 2011 in the US mainly, because it was in 2011 that we saw the first startups appear. You had BitPay and you had blockchain. It's in 2011 that you had the very first Bitcoin conference. And it's in 2011 that the media and regulators started to pay attention, especially with the price bubble back then. And we're seeing the exact same trends happen around here.
Very good. And I want to touch on something I'm surprised hasn't been spoken about yet and has major implications in the region when it comes to finance. And Makki, maybe you want to take the lead on it. And how does Bitcoin relate to Islamic finance and Sharia finance? How is it compatible, or how is it not compatible with that?
In my opinion, at least, in my knowledgeable Islamic opinion, I would say that it is Sharia compliant, and there are 3 elements of Sharia compliance. Number 1 is it can't be related to pork or alcohol or any of the haram stuff that Islam talks about. Number 2, interest is completely a no-go. Anything that, if it touches give or take, is a complete no-go. And the third one is tangibility of exchange, whereas there's a clear line between what you are exchanging, what value you're exchanging. I give an example of a mortgage derivative where you know, the mortgage itself is derived 2 or 3 times, and then you buy a representation of what that derivative is rather than a specific portion, so an exact line of difference. So in that sense, it is fully Sharia compliant, and I'm in the works of getting at least university scholars or some lawyers or economists to write a white paper and describe why and how it is Sharia compliant. In terms of Saudi, nobody is going to touch it if it isn't. But you know, after you fully understand it, any Muslim would say, "Oh yeah, this is fine." But obviously, it's more important, I know, for Western economists, where I know now in Europe as well and the US, there's quite a market for Islamic funds and Islamic banking as well. So they need a kind of entity to say, "Yeah, this is okay."
So there's nothing that needs to be changed? There's no specific...
Not that I think of.
Beautiful.
I think if someone else, yeah.
And so, David, maybe you can touch on the startup culture and environment in the region in general, and maybe more specifically, do you find it difficult to find partners and employees, being that so few people are involved or have a history in Bitcoin?
Yeah, so there's 2 aspects to that question. There's the startup scene, and then there's the developer or talent interest in Bitcoin. So on the startup scene, I think there's, you know, we have some amazing work that's being put into growing these communities. And you know, we can talk about, for example, Dubai, which already has a couple of accelerators and co-working spaces. I could talk about Lebanon with the central bank actually putting $400 million behind investment arms to support specifically startups in the country. You can talk about Amman, which is kind of the tech hub of the whole region. So I think in terms of startup, there is a lot of exciting stuff happening, and I'm very, very optimistic about it. The second half of the question is about Bitcoin, and I think, you know, it goes back to what I was saying during my talk. The level of awareness and education is still fairly low. We don't have that much content creation and distribution in Arabic in the region, and that's something we really need to work on as a community, as well as getting the support of the external community, so that you create excitement at the general population level, but also in these specific pockets of entrepreneurs and developers. And so one of the ideas, for example, that we're exploring is creating hackathons, Bitcoin-specific hackathons, and you create more excitement that way. So there's a lot of stuff we could be doing, and it is still early.
I'm going to add actually to that. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Since we're as well in DIFC, and Dubai is famous for like industry-specific free zones, what would be actually interesting is to have initiatives that would actually support fintech startups, specifically Bitcoin. Having that sort of industry-specific clusters would even support startups more in terms of resources, partners, access to funding. So having such initiatives and Dubai leading on that would be a fantastic thing to see.
And then your most ambitious assessment, what do you think 12 months from now, as we have the 2nd annual Dubai Bitcoin Conference, and what ideally, what does it look like on the ground in Dubai and Jordan, Lebanon, and the region?
Since we're in Dubai, and I think Dubai has the most buzzing startup scene in the region. I mean, Amman and Beirut, they do have a buzzing scene as well in terms of startups, but Dubai has got like serious accelerators, serious investors now on the seed level, angel level, and like now on the VC level as well that are investing in all sorts of tech startups. So I would say in terms of Bitcoin conference next year, what I would hope is to see more startups in the region, building local products and localizing products for the region. And I'd hope to see more investors, serious investors from the region and from outside the region also wanting to boost that. And then more engagement as well from regulators, positive engagement from regulators to see that whole ecosystem sort of coming together.
So I want to stress on that previous last point. What I would really like to see is regional investors start backing Bitcoin startup. We're seeing more interest from international investors rather than regional investors, and we need to get that support from the inside because the region is a complex space to navigate, and we need those veterans and experienced individuals champion the Bitcoin cause and help us navigate this space.
Interesting. And Makki, considering Saudi's place in the global market, and this is something I've thought about a lot recently, but never really had a chance to have anybody, at your level of knowledge address, is what specifically, especially from people on the outside trying to make Bitcoin happen in Saudi Arabia, what can we do there, and what does it look like potentially? How does Bitcoin get traction in Saudi Arabia?
Well, honestly, number one is going to have to be regulation, because in Saudi Arabia the regulator is one of the toughest, and is not very well known for accepting or beginning at least innovative trends, creative alternatives, at least for the sake of the alternative, if it comes up. And trying to understand from the point of view of the regulator, Bitcoin doesn't bring any intrinsic value. It takes away some of the control, some of the input that the regulator has on the currencies in general. And in terms of, I think we could start with an economy building. And if an infrastructure is in place and the regulators don't shut it down, let's just say they just let it be for a while, the adoption will increase. There's a lot of, in particular, I always say the remittance market. As Ola had said before, it's the biggest outbound remitter in the Gulf. And the sheer number that are released, I don't have any at the moment, but there's an untapped market there, and particularly when you go from bank to unbanked, from the people who don't speak any English, who want to receive or send money, to the people ingrained in villages, in random places in Asia who want to receive money. I think that is a big key in both sides of the remittance market. So at the low end of the Asians, or if you're sending to Europe or Australia or the Western society, making it mainstream, I think, will include that, because there's a lot of parents sending their daughters money. There's a lot of government-sent funds that go across, and as usual, there's 4 or 5 middlemen in the middle. The potential is there, and it's going to be tough. It's, as most of you know, Saudi is not very easy on outside, not just involvement, influences. Me and you, we believe in Bitcoin. We want the people to pick up, but it's going to have to be an internal, bottom-to-top approach. We have to start the conversation going. We have to tell people about it, and then just let it kind of flourish from within.
So maybe now we can open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions about the startup ecosystem, Bitcoin in the region.
You mentioned that Bitcoin would be compatible with Sharia law. Would Bitcoin also serve as a reasonable interface with the banking system, assuming that somebody on the other side would take it? Because the rest of the world is pretty happy with interest in all the other aspects of the Western system. And then the second part of that question I forgot, so I'll just leave it at that.
As you answer that question, maybe you can describe a little the alternative system that the Islamic banking institutions utilize and get around, because it's very applicable for a lot of Bitcoin entrepreneurs, and I think very underknown how all that works.
Of course. I like the reference of how the hell. So on the other side of it, so that you have, as far as the Islam part of it is concerned, you have the local entities who deal in Islamic only. So they will deal with other entities outside that are non-Islamic, non-Sharia compliant, as long as the products and services that go across are not tainted by said. So if you've got an interest, if there's a bank somewhere that offers interest on a particular concept, they will stay away from that. Or if a fund that sells in pork, they'll stay away from that. So they'll tap into the products and things that are only Sharia compliant. What the bank does otherwise is unrelated to them, because that doesn't come back to them and kind of haunt them in the future. There was another part of your question. What was your question? There's another part of your question. What was it?
Oh, I couldn't remember it. But the idea being that if you're doing commerce in Bitcoin, and then the other party were to take that Bitcoin and convert it into dollars via BitPay or whatever, then it would not be it wouldn't be a Sharia compliant issue that's what they did.
Oh no, whatever's on the other end, whatever decisions the other end makes, it had nothing to do with the local entity, so they're not really bothered.
I would just like to make a small remark to follow up on what you guys were talking about. I come from a banking background, and as far as Sharia compliant is involved, basically there's, in essence, there's no difference between commercial, regular banking and Sharia compliance banking. It's just a matter of labeling.
The wording.
So it's just the wording, the documentations, the way that you put things into perspective, but in essence, it's the same thing. It reflects interest rates, but in a different manner that is approved by a Sharia board, and it goes through the regular process. So basically, in essence, there is no difference between regular commercial banking and Sharia compliance. As far as Bitcoin is concerned, I don't think that Sharia compliant is going to be an issue. I think the issue is going to be things that are far more important than the Sharia compliance. I think it's the sense of being able to trace the transactions from a security and a safety point of view, because whether we like it or not, we live in a very turbulent region, and there's a lot of I wouldn't say political instability, but I would say that there's a lot of stuff going around here. So from a security sense of, from a security point of view, it has to be very regulated in the sense that all transactions can be traced, so that we make sure where the money is going, so it doesn't go into funding suspicious activity and whatnot.
Thank you for that. Any more questions?
I've got a follow-up comment as to that, and a lot of outside investors are always about Sharia compliant more than anything, but the important thing is the regulators. Big issues with the Saudi regulator is obviously anti-money laundering and terrorism funding. So if I were to sell it to them now and explain to them Bitcoin in its current form, they're going to turn around and say, well, we can regulate on our end by saying, you know, if you're a company running Bitcoin in Saudi, you do AML and you do where the funds are coming from. But because we cannot control the other side of it, we're not going to let the whole thing, the whole system fly. It's because it's that important, and they're in a situation where they don't really are after the innovation, or they don't want to be the part of the innovation if it doesn't suit them. Like, you know, love it or leave it, and we're leaving it in that case. And I reference Atcoin in particular, Athencoin, is it? Where it's an alternate crypto coin where even to get your wallet address, you have to go through identity verification. You get your ID, you get your address, and only after that is finished, you can trade openly with anyone on the network. And that's a very important aspect, particularly when it comes to compliance.
Any final comments? All right, so I imagine everybody's pretty weary of the 8 hours of Bitcoin talks we've had, right? So we're over a little early, but after we leave here, we have a delightful 47th floor cocktail reception at the Warwick Hotel right down the street. Oh, well, I guess the view will still be okay, but whatever. All right, so the 44th floor, windows on the world, correct, at the Warwick Hotel, maybe a 15, 20-minute walk or a 3-minute taxi ride right down the street, and I look forward to seeing you all there.